Greetings, planet Earth. We are live. Sun Ra Arkive. Christopher Eddy here with my special guest this evening, Jon Hunt. Welcome, Jon.
Thank you very much.
Jon is, we've got the Pink Floyd delay on.
Crap.
Hello, hello, hello.
Is it on my end? Am I dying out here?
It's on my end. I was just having fun. I had YouTube up in another browser window, and it's on a delay, and I can't resist the Pink Floyd reference when I hear that delay.
Gotta do it.
Welcome, everybody. We've got Brad and Miss Me in the chat. Welcome. We've got special guest tonight, Jon Hunt. Jon is a talented and illustrious graphic designer, creative director, musician, and artiste. We know him in the Sun Ra world as being the creative force behind the Sundazed modern harmonic reissues that we've been seeing come out over the past few years, and all of the beautiful, sensitive, appropriate cover designs that Jon's been putting together for all of those. So we're gonna talk about those. We're gonna talk about Jon's background as an artist and a creative, some of his process, what it's like working with Bob Irwin, Jay Millar, the Sundazed crew, perhaps some of his inspirations and references, and basically all of the thought and passion and creativity that goes into bringing you all of these beautiful artworks that we've been enjoying for the modern harmonic Sun Ra releases. So Jon, very grateful to have you with tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. And I'm super psyched that you guys like the stuff that we do, because, I sometimes, you live in a vacuum to some extent. You're in your own little world and you never really get to hear feedback. People could hate them. I don't know, but it's really great to hear that people are liking what we do. It's very gratifying.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to hear that feedback loop isn't coming back to you. I wonder if that's kind of a part of the times that we live in, but maybe also a detriment of the digital age, where people maybe assume that you're hearing these things and don't get in touch and put it forward. But it kind of reminds me that we need to let people know when we appreciate what they do and when it means something, when it enriches our lives. So you will get plenty of fawning from me tonight.
That's good.
And I have no qualms geeking out. And I will say, and you'll probably find this, I don't know, probably a little bit funny and totally misguided, but I mean, I'm a fan of your work, and trust me, I know the realities of being a working artist, but I hold you like in this very high esteem as being someone who figured out how to live the dream, which I'm sure kind of makes you laugh, because some days you don't feel like you're living the dream. But
I totally agree with you. Yeah, it is the dream. I mean, it's the job that I've wanted basically my whole life. So yeah, I mean, it's great. It's really great to be.
Awesome.
It's an honor, to work on this kind of stuff. Really
awesome. Yeah, and Sundazed is such a great label with such a great history and pedigree and such a high level of aesthetics and quality and love that goes into what they do.
Yep.
So, okay, before we get too ahead of ourselves, we've been starting most of our live streams here by reading one of Sun Ra's immeasurable equations, Sun Ra's collected poetry. And the volume that I'm referring to is the collected poetry and prose compiled by James L. Wolfe and Hart McGeerkin, Way to Wild Press. This is still available from Amazon. Highly recommended. Well worth the money. But, Sun Ra as an artist, not just a musician, a visual artist, a poet, a stage crafter, and so many other things. So I think it's really important to recognize the things that he did, like poetry other than music. And what I found is that, based on the recommendation of author Paul Youngquist, who wrote the Sun Ra book, Pure Solar World, and he's also a teacher of literature and poetry. When we talked about the poetry, and I told him I struggled with it when I was reading it silently in my mind, he said, read it out loud, give it sound, give it vibration, and let it ring out. And that's made all the difference. So we've been making a point of doing that here. So tonight we've got and some music. And some music is not music, but some notness is noteness. Sound of the realm not, otherness. One day you will see that thatness, through the image of the eye, of the multi-eye, of the council of the eyes, one day, not once but hence, thence, there, otherwhere, twice the day, twice before the time, and twice above, beyond, below, eternal, twice. Never with the remembrance of once, never upon a time, twice, you will see thatness, theirsness, themness. Lightning birds, lightning land, upon the land birds light, and the light is as the darkness, within they dwell the land. Through the eye, the sound of spoken thatness, this is, and my thatness. And some music by Sun Ra from the Immeasurable Equations. All right.
Cool. I love that line. Some notness is noteness.
Some notness is noteness. And, you know, there's some alliteration and some wordplay that doesn't quite come across when I'm reading it. Like, you know, there is actually spelled ThereTheir. So definitely a musician with words as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, John, thank you for indulging me. So let's start at the beginning with you. So
sure.
part of what inspires me and all of us about Sun Ra is that he was a complete being. We kind of know him primarily as a musician, a band leader, a composer, but he was the complete package as an artist. You know, he did visual arts, he did poetry, and was incredibly inspired and creative, drew from a huge wellspring of art and thought history. And his presence ends up bringing together all of these similar minds, not just the fans, but the musicians and the creatives, the producers, the artists, that all end up doing work that kind of supports, you know, these packages and releases that come out as Sun Ra. It's made up of many minds. So I'm very interested in the creative process, and the thought process that goes into the work that people like you do, where you come from, but also, you know, in the process of doing work that's Sun Ra related. What do you learn from him as an artist? What are your observations, and what do you bring to it and take forward? So for you, you're a musician as well, correct?
Yep.
So you're a musician. You're a visual artist. Any other art forms that you're into?
I do some writing. I have done a lot of music criticism for various papers and magazines and stuff, and a little bit of fiction writing badly. But I mean, I've sort of learned in my advanced age where my strengths lie, and I think I'm definitely more of a visual guy than anything else. Although, you know, music certainly, I mean, that just sort of flows through me and constantly. So that informs all the visual art I do. But also, when I play music, I tend to think pretty visually, so it kind of crisscrosses, uh, you know.
So, what came first for you as a young person? Was it the visual arts? Was it music?
Oh, definitely visual arts for me. I have been drawing since I was tiny, and my mom and dad saved a lot of my art from when I was little. And you can see even just early on all the weird obsessions that I would get into, and just sort of obsess over little things like 2 years of me drawing Popeye, and 2 years of me drawing all the presidents, and just weird shit like that. Um, you know, basically kind of informs how I think about things. And yeah, and then music, I kind of had to be forced into it by my parents a little bit. Like we had a piano, and so they thought, hey, let's get this kid on the piano. And then I kind of struggled through it until I discovered rock music and jazz and that kind of stuff. And then then I took to it. And then spent a lot of time trying to be a professional musician, playing guitar and bass and stuff, and then eventually switched over to the visual arts full time, or most
Okay.
of the time. Yeah.
So when you were a kid and you were drawing and taking music lessons, when did the intersection of those two things happen as far as you becoming aware of the visual side of um, music presentation and album covers and poster art and merch and all that stuff?
I think it was, I mean, for sure it was the Beatles. And I was probably in third or fourth grade. I had a pretty cool music teacher who was, probably a little bit of a hippie, and she did cool stuff. Like she had a mini Moog that she would bring to class and let us play around with the Moog synthesizer. And she loved the Beatles and would always bring, and especially psychedelic era Beatles. And so she would bring that stuff in and play it for us. And I would always kind of stare at the sleeve design at this, while it was playing, and just kind of, you start to connect the two in your mind. I mean, rock and roll has always been a very visual thing. I mean, even just growing up with something like the Electric Company on public television. I mean, so much of that kind of psychedelic Pushpin Studios kind of visual stuff flows through that show, and along with free jazz and funk and God knows what else. And so there's that sort of weird melting pot of psychedelic and just freaky stuff that we grew up with in the 70s and part of the 80s. And yeah, it all ends up kind of getting sucked in to the whole deal.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think we're the same generation, because everything you just said are all the same touch points for me.
Yeah.
The Beatles was the first musical love.
Mhm.
The first recognition of the power of cover art was the Beatles. Electric Company and comic books and
Comic books, yeah.
monster magazines and Batman
Mhm.
and all that stuff. But when you say Electric Company, it just makes me realize, and I just had this flash, how kind of the post 60s generation that were working and doing the visuals, well, all things for shows like Electric Company or Sesame Street or whatever, public television, they were not talking down to their audience. There were some really sophisticated visual philosophical, spiritual concepts that they transmitted through the work that they did. And
Yeah.
I don't realize until I hear people like you reference it, or I see clips, and I think about the seeds that were planted that were, I think, really sophisticated and elevated,
Oh yeah.
that
Yeah.
came through children's programming. And I don't know if that tradition continued in further
I
generations, or
don't know if it did. I mean, I meet kids, even millennials, that grew up with a whole different realm of stuff, and they have a lot of different cultural touch points. and they tend to be a little less. I mean, I definitely don't want to, like, stereotype millennials or even any of the younger generation, but there's a certain freakiness that I think we absorbed as kids that comes out in the stuff that we do later in life, that I'm not sure is there or as organically for the next generation after us. And I'm super glad that we ended up with that kind of stuff. I mean, without things like Sesame Street and the sort of Joe Raposo soft pop that flows through that, and just all the weird stuff that we absorbed, I think is all tantamount to who we became as people, and as artists and as musicians and whatever else.
Yeah, I agree. And from a tools standpoint, I feel very fortunate too, being exposed to that type of work as a young person. It was still handmade. It was
Mm,
still drawing, painting, physical tools on physical surfaces, photographed, manipulated, pre-computer era, which, in the case of Sun Ra's record covers and art, I think is a really um, important aspect of it. But I feel very fortunate to have come up in that generation where that was the foundation that I learned. And
mhm.
when I was in art school, and finally realized that probably the only chance I had of having a career and making a living was becoming a graphic designer. Computers were an elective. There was one in the corner, and you did it on Friday afternoons, um, when there was time. So
Yeah,
I feel very fortunate that kind of my career as a visual artist has evolved with the technology, and I feel so fortunate that I learned how to do things with my hands
yeah,
and tools that
organically
are out of the
first.
box.
Do you find that it makes it easier for you then to learn how to do it digitally?
I think conceptually, understanding shapes, space, layering, interaction, perspective, but I just think for me creatively, um, there's something about the freedom of really being out of the box
Mm,
and really within the landscape of the mind that can be very freeing if you remember to allow it to be. And
yeah.
there are certain textures, certain layers, certain um, reflections of light or the way that light falls, even on two-dimensional surfaces unintentionally, that just
Mhm,
can't be replicated, which is why I've been so apprehensive. Part of why I've been apprehensive about AI and why
mm,
I'm so interested in the exercise and exploration that you've been doing is I
mhm.
think that there are some things that are irreplaceable.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like being a musician. Um, that nothing replaces touch,
Yeah, no, that's
at least for a human,
the
right?
tactility of how paper feels, and when you look at a piece of paper, or you look at the texture of paper, you can feel it. Um, and you'd be shocked how much of the stuff that I do for Sundazed or for whatever that looks like it's been hand drawn is actually digital at this point. Um, I mean, I think that in some ways you're fighting to sort of replicate a sort of handmade feel digitally, but it becomes kind of easier to do, than actually gluing bits onto paper and
Yep.
things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, however it works.
Hmm.
So, um, so let's see. So at what point, you know, did you start designing and creating visuals for music specifically?
um God, I mean, I've been doing a lot of that since college, but just sort of spare time. I mean, I got really obsessed in college with psychedelic art, the Rick Griffin, Wes Wilson, the San Francisco poster artists, and then the guys in England that were doing the same stuff.
Yep. Victor Moscoso. He's my
Yeah,
favorite.
all those guys. I mean, that's my bread and butter. I
Yep.
mean, I
Me
love
too.
that stuff so much. And in college, I would just, get high and spend hours just trying to draw, like replicate that look and feel of that stuff. And I look back on the stuff I did back then, and it was just terrible. But I just kind of kept doing it. And then at some point, I don't even know what the hell I was. I think I was just so disheartened with my job, like my day job, that I started just designing fake album covers online, like um for albums that don't exist was kind of the thing that I was doing for a while, where it was like, albums that never came out. um like the Who's Lifehouse, or the Beach Boys Smile, or any of those kind of ones that are unreleased. And I would do like fake album covers for them. And at some point I threw them all out there online, and just people saw them. And I think that's how Bob Irwin at Sundazed, I think, saw me do a Velvet Underground one, and contacted me and asked me, would I want to use something similar for a Velvet Underground project that they were doing.
Nice.
I was like, yes, I would.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes, that is exactly what I would love to do. And so, I mean, from there, I kind of got sucked in. It was fun working with them, and I think they liked the stuff I did. And yeah, we've and then ever since then, I've been doing stuff on and off for them, mostly on. So
Nice.
yeah,
I put the link to John's Tumblr in the chat notes, and if you do a search, you can find a bunch of sites that have the album covers that John's referring to.
they pop up like in people write articles about these lost albums, and then they'll throw on one of my thumbnails, and I'm like, oh, cool. It's nice that they've sort of disseminated their way into the pop culture.
Yeah, and they totally work for what they are. I think that's the beauty. I mean, one of the things that I love about your style is that you seem to take all of the best aspects of past, present, future, um, hand rendered, computer rendered, and you just do what feels perfectly right for each cover and for each project. And it's, this is a very high compliment, but you almost become transparent in the process. Jon Hunt almost disappears, because some of those covers look as though you're channeling the art directors from Verve or MGM in the 60s that did the Velvets. But it's not slavish. You're not ripping off the stuff from the past, but you've internalized it and you bring it forward. And there's just this really cool magic about some of those covers, where it could go straight from your Tumblr onto the next Capitol Records Beach Boys reissue box set and be perfect.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, that is the key, is that when I design any of that kind of stuff, you've seen reissues that just look like somebody slopped them together on a computer. And that's always been frustrating to me, because a lot of times these records are so amazing, but they deserve to be housed in something that is period accurate, and cool at the same time. And it always bothers me when there's anachronisms that live on these things that don't fit or look not of the time. It just, to me, it just doesn't do the work justice, the music justice, and so right before I got on this call, I've been researching a project that I'm working on. And so I was searching, 1967 Columbia Records, and just kind of going through Discogs and looking at, what that art director, the couple of art directors over there did at that time, and the fonts that they used, and the colors that they used, and the types of layouts. And yeah, like you said, not to slavishly duplicate those, but to internalize some of their techniques and then hopefully reproduce things that are faithful to that era without looking like cheap copies or without looking like, digital hodgepodge, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I listen to you talk about that, fonts are such an important tool that a designer has, but I
Mm.
feel become more and more overlooked and undervalued as time goes on with a lot of digital layout. But when I think about, like you had said, the art directors of Columbia Records, um, the typography of the time and the layout and the illustration style for album covers in particular, there is a musical rhythm and flow to those covers if they're properly chosen for the music, where
Mhm.
those vintage fonts have a certain motion and flow that doesn't have the same feeling or connotation that a modern one does. Um, and until you said it, I hadn't quite thought of some of those period aspects, how they reflect the music of the time as
They
well as
do.
the
Oh,
visual
they so
style of
do.
the time.
There are some fonts where you look at them and it just immediately, it brings to mind a record. Or maybe it's just me, but like there's one particular font that I'm thinking of and I can't think of the name of it right now because it goes by a bunch of different names. Most recently, it's one of those Opti free fonts that someone did digitally, but the particular font that Columbia used all the time in like 66, 67. And if you look at it, you just immediately think, Bob Dylan, or you think, Columbia Records. And if I showed it to you, you'd go, oh yeah, that's the one,
Yep.
and it jumps that right into your mind. You go, yeah, oh, Dylan 67, Dylan 66, and um, it's amazing how much just getting that aspect of it right puts you in that mindset, makes you think of other things. And then whatever you're listening to, it kind of it files it away in a little mental space with that stuff, so it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And the words Cooper Black were ringing in my mind from
Yes,
you know,
that
um,
sounds.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So you were doing, it sounds like you were doing corporate um, agency design work before you transitioned full time into the record industry. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of web design, corporate web design stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's one of those things you kind of just do what you can do. And Minneapolis has a lot of little advertising agencies and little web agencies and big web agencies, and so you just kind of end up falling into that.
Hmm. So you were lucky enough to get to a point with Sundazed and Modern Harmonic that you were able to leave that behind completely.
Sort of. I mean, I still do. I mean, I still do a lot of stuff on the side. I do have a whole other job that I do that I've been doing, working on a game that a friend of mine is producing, like a video game. Um, so that's for a while, for a year or two, that's what's been paying the bills. And the Sundays stuff probably takes as much time, but it's not it's not hugely lucrative. It's just really satisfying.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things, like I just want to keep it going and just keep producing stuff, even if that's not what the huge money is in.
And that's got to feel great to work for an organization that you really believe in.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm super passionate about what they do too. So
So Bob Irwin, seeing the Velvet Underground cover that you did is how they reached out to you.
yep.
Okay. And then you were introduced to Jay Millar when he came on board. Was he already there when you joined?
No, so I worked for them for a while and then didn't for a short time. Um, And then when Jay came on, I kind of wrote to them and said, hey, I'm really interested in doing more stuff for you and coming back and like doing a lot of work. And it was right around the time he came on. And I mean, there were a couple little kind of psychedelic things that we did, but the first big project I worked on when I came back on was the John Cage and Sun Ra album. And I think that cover, when I did that, made Bob, or yep, that's the one. And I think that made Bob Irwin really happy. And I also think that made Irwin Chusid really happy too over at Sun Ra. And so that kind of began the association and began sort of me working on a lot of the raw stuff that comes in.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cover.
Thank you.
It's very unique. So while we're on it, what was the process as far as collaging these found objects? And it looks like photographing them, but like, how did this cover come from concept to execution?
Well, I did a lot of research. Like I didn't want it to just look like a Sun Ra cover, because John Cage has his own visual aesthetic, like hugely. And so I wanted it to kind of be like a combination between the two. And so I did a lot of looking at Cage's stuff in the 70s. And for quite a while, Cage was on a label called Tomato Records, which their main designer was Milt Glaser from
no kidding.
So
and Milton Glaser, just for our audience that doesn't know who that is, when I hear that name, the most popular thing I think of is the Bob Dylan multicolored hair poster that came in Greatest Hits Volume 1. Is there something that you would tell our audience when to?
No, that's like his most famous thing.
That's an iconic image.
It really is. And he's known sort of for starting that style, that kind of cartoony psychedelic style that, you know, Peter Max kind of worked in that same vein. There were, you know, Seymour Schwast and some of those other folks. But in the 70s, Glaser was doing kind of more collage stuff and like weird found object photographs and stuff. And so a lot of the stuff he did for Cage was that kind of stuff. And all of it was round, which I thought was really interesting. Like all the covers he did for Cage in the 70s had circles as a motif. And so I kind of started with that, but then I brought in kind of all the stuff that, that Cage used on like prepared piano that he would use. Like he would drop nails and spoons and such onto the strings of the piano and then play them. And as he would strike a key, the spoon would rattle the strings and make weird sounds. And, you know, you see the metronome needles and stuff in there too. Yep. And then I kind of, you know, I wanted to bring in the idea of like that stuff as a mandala, you know, kind of like a spiritual motif in there too. So it kind of all ties together. So a little bit of Ra, a little bit of, you know, there's that sort of planetary aspect. I think that's more in the Ra vein.
Yep.
So it all kind of ties together in that.
There's the timepiece clock connotation.
Yep.
The little cameo in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sweet piece.
Thank you.
Does this exist physically? Did you find all these objects?
No. Oh my God. No. And that's a perfect example of how I cheat.
So this is a digital composite.
That's a digital composite. Yeah. I mean, I just took, I think I did actually shoot the one nail on a black background with my phone and then just duplicated it a billion times. So, I mean, I cheat a lot.
That's interesting because I had a very romantic vision in my mind that this was hanging in your living room or Irwin's living room somewhere. I mean, and that shows how well you've done the photo work, is that it looks like a real sculpture piece.
Yeah. And there have been times when I've built sculptures, like we did a sleeve. God, I can't remember who it was even for, where we built a sculpture out of like pieces of old machinery, and that I actually built on my floor and then shot a picture of. But yeah, this is a good example of faking digitally, something.
That's great. That's cool. I mean, and that just gives me so much more appreciation. It's beautiful on vinyl too.
Yeah, I do like the
I
bigger.
didn't pull out the vinyl because they're just so hard to hold up to the screen.
There
Yeah,
it
it's
was.
gorgeous.
Yeah, I am really pleased with that one, and we did actually make a giant sized wall hanging that is up in Bob Irwin's living room, as far as I know.
So one thing that I always say about Sundazed is that their attention to detail, quality control, production, the care that goes into making the product is always so impressive. It just
Mhm.
it feels and looks good. So, as an art director, kind of with the modern CD printing and pressing that you have available and the way that vinyl's made now, do you have the ability to pick stocks, to pick Pantones, to pick special foils, treatments, spot colors, embosses, like design touches? Does that enter
Sometimes.
into it?
Oh, sometimes. I will say that I suggest it virtually every time I do something, but
Yep.
oftentimes the budgets are pretty small. I
It's
mean,
too
they print
expensive.
1,000 of these, and sometimes we do special things for Record Store Day or for Vinyl Me Please, for example, where we'll do weird foils or things like that. I always want to do more. I always try to get them to do embossing, which is like really expensive.
Yeah, super
They're always like, "No, we're not spending money on embossing," but
for
someday I will convince them to do that.
for a run that small, right? I mean, it's not.
It's a toughie. It doesn't recoup its cost, but
But the reason I ask is um, it almost seems like some of those ideas are already designed in here, like they're already intentionally baked in, and they just haven't quite been embossed and popped out yet.
they did a version of that that they produced in Nashville that actually was laminated in a shower
Yeah,
curtain.
that's why I'm holding
So
it up.
yeah, and I they sent me one, and that one is real, and
Yep.
this one is the fake version of it. But
And that was limited to what, 50 copies?
yeah, it was a really small run, and it
Yeah,
was
I
it
haven't
was
gotten any
cool.
of those.
They
But
are
yeah, that's
very
cool.
hen's teeth.
I'd like to ask you, kind of go through kind of these chronologically.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
ask you about this one because this is actually how you and I were introduced and didn't even know it
Mhm.
because you did the art direction and the Chelsea Bonnell illustration, and I did the liner notes on this.
Right, 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 right.
So I think that this was when I really, started to commit your name to memory, and I also started making connections like Jon Hunt. I remember that name from Smile Shop and the Beach Boys message board, and like I've
Hmm.
heard of that cat. Like he's into music. He's a designer too. Um, can you tell me anything about what it's like working with another artist's original paintings or artwork and trying to do something that's appropriate for them when it's really not your original vision. But I love this cover because it
Oh, me
feels
too.
so absolutely appropriate. We, as record collectors, we all have these dreams where we go into a dream and we find a record in a record store, and then we're lucid and we realize it's a dream, and how do we get this out of the dream into the real world?
Yes.
That's what this record feels like to me, like it came out of a dream.
Yeah, yeah, good, because that's my goal, is literally that. Yeah, it's easy when the stuff that they give you to work with is awesome, which with Sundays it is 99.9% of the time. I mean, I think it was Bob Irwin that had bought the rights to use the Bone Stell catalog. And so for a while, a lot of the Sun Ra stuff we were doing had that on there because it felt appropriate with Sun Ra because it's such cool old school, pulp sci-fi cover looking stuff. But then if you put, I mean, as you can see, the Sun Ra logo from the 60s that was on a lot of his, Saturn stuff from the 60s, and match the fonts on there, then it looks very appropriate to the stuff that he was putting out back then too. I mean, almost like someone had just said, hey, you got an extra budget of, several $1,000s. What are you going to do, Sun Ra? And well, I like this book. Let's put that on there. So, yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite ones that we've done, even though, the painting is by someone else, just because it's such a cool work, isn't it? I mean,
it is from a dream. It feels like it's from the other side. Like this record came out in 1960 something, and Modern Harmonic found new old stock in a warehouse somewhere that had never shipped.
Yeah,
which is just an incredible experience as a record fan. But I mean, I just think it speaks to how well you and that organization are doing what you do, that you can make it feel that right.
Thank you. Yeah, that's our goal. That's my goal, particularly, like to make it look like you've reached into an alternate universe.
Yeah,
the Berenstain Bears universe or whatever, and pulled it out. So yeah.
Yep. So, question for you, technical question.
Yeah.
So this font, this Sun Ra and his Arkestra font, is an original treatment of this typography, right? You've actually picked it up from
one of the records,
from a pre-existing record. So what's your process? Are you scanning it and redrawing it in the computer with something like Adobe Illustrator, or are you tracing it by hand and scanning it in? Like, how are you picking up some of these elements so that they're so clean?
Yes, both of those things. It depends on what it is. Illustrator has a really great feature where you can, if you bring in a piece of black and white art, especially things like fonts or like line drawings, cartoons, if there's just basically one button that you push that converts it into a vector image. Right. And then from that, you can tweak all the little corners and the little bits to make it perfect. And once you've got it in vector form, you can make it bigger or smaller, and you don't lose any quality. Right. So I tend to try to get everything into that format, so then we can blow it up or shrink it, and it just will look clean and nice,
So what elements are you working with? Are you working with original pressings of the records? Or are you working with CD reissues? Did you have access to any of the original artwork by Claude Dangerfield and all? And
no, none of that. It is almost all scans of something that's in someone else's collection.
Okay.
And sometimes I'll get giant, 70 billion pixels per square inch scans, and sometimes they'll just hand me a 2000 by 2000 pixel image and say make the best of it. And it kind of just depends on what's available. I think for some of that Sun Ra, for that particular font, I think I just pulled something off the web. I mean, I think I just pulled something from Discogs that was like a little tiny image, and once I digitize it, I can do whatever I want to with it. It makes it really easy to mess with.
This treatment's always fascinated me because a lot of the typographic treatments of Sun Ra and his Arkestra from the 50s Chicago period appear to be hand lettered, with calligraphy nibs that have wider and narrower edges. So it's interesting to see it come into the computer realm and take the form of machine type, when I think it probably originates from a hand rendering.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so much of Ra's stuff is hand drawn. I mean, everything that we've done, I've tried to bring in, if there is a hand drawn aspect to it, I've tried to bring it in wherever possible and work with that, you know.
Oh, I could talk to you forever about all of these. They're beautiful.
Thank
So
you.
so this little series here, and I kind of, in my mind, I think of it as a series because they're from a similar time period, but they were
Mm,
also released pretty closely together. This kind of 72, 73 New York Sun Ra period, and
mhm.
the album Astro Black, the album Crystal Spears. So Black originally came out with a different cover on Impulse Records.
Yep. Yep.
Crystal Spears was recorded as part of the Impulse contract, but never released at the time,
Mhm. Mhm.
as was the Cymbals sessions.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you have created all new artwork for these, or yeah, modern artwork for these releases. And Astro Black definitely has 70s references, and but is very different than the original Astro Black that came out on Impulse.
Mhm.
Crystal Spears is just this beautiful classic picture with classic period typography. And then we get to the Symbol sessions, which is
Jim Flory,
which
right?
is, yeah, the artwork of Jim Flory, these humanoid anthropomorphic figures, and
Mhm.
Erwin Chusad being not only the guardian of the Sun Ra estate, but the Jim Flora estate as well. So we've seen Jim
Right.
Flora's
Right.
artwork on a few of the Sun Ra covers,
Yep.
including this one as well.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
can you talk about a little bit about the process of this? Were they designed as a suite to all kind of relate to each other? How much were you looking at the Impulse album covers for Sun Ra in the 70s, and kind of what was your thought process to come up with these?
Well, definitely so taking them one at a time, the Astro Black one, the original cover is one that I think Erwin and Jay were not super thrilled with. I mean, it's kind of it's hard to see. I mean, if you have the original anywhere, it's kind of a dim picture of a face kind of in space, and you kind of can't tell what's going on. And I think they wanted something a little more striking. Um, and so, I mean, for that one, I wanted to go full like Afrofuturist. And I mean, it seems a little disingenuous. So I'm Native American. Um, Working in an Afrofuturist genre sometimes, and the only excuse that I can give is that there is a native futurist tradition as well, and I try to bring in aspects of that. There you go. That's the original. And it's cool, but it's one of those things that doesn't really stand out.
Hmm.
So
It's
bringing
not
in
very well rendered either.
no, no,
Pretty mushy face.
it's a mushy face. So we wanted to bring in some of that kind of that 70s kind of Afrofuturist feel, a little bit of oh God, what is the name of the artist that did Santana, Abraxas, Mehdi Klarvine. It took me a second there. Sorry about that. He's a Dutch cat who did a lot of he did stuff for Jimi Hendrix and Buddy Miles and Santana, and is kind of known for surrealist Afrofuturist images, despite being a Dutch white dude.
Yeah.
And so there's a little influence from that in there, and then just sci-fi Omni magazine, kind of stuff.
Hmm. It's interesting that you say that about the Abraxas cover and that artist, because I see it in the really brassy metallic color scheme as well. I mean
Mm-hmm.
that I can definitely see that, and wouldn't have made that connection unless you mentioned it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a huge influence of mine, although, he's a oil painter and his stuff is so fluid and interestingly looks a lot like AI art, which is like, the mind of the computer and left to its own devices ends up producing stuff that looks like Monty Clarvine. So that's kind of weird, but yeah.
So not to be cheesy, but is there any conscious Pink Floyd reference in this cover?
Not conscious, probably subconscious though. I mean, Hypnosis, Storm Thorgerson, huge fan, huge influence on my stuff generally. So yeah, I bet subconsciously my brain was thinking Dark Side of the Moon. But
I just see the triangle, pyramid, rainbow shapes and think of this as an album that came out in 1973, and that's the connection that I make. I'm thinking Floyd. I
yeah,
was just curious if not that it was like if it ever crossed your mind in the creative process, like just I mean, it's
I
of the
bet
era.
I bet I was thinking actually of you remember that show In Search of?
Sure, of
Um,
course.
yeah, Leonard
Love
Nimoy.
it. Yeah.
I for sure was thinking of the episode of that about pyramid power.
Yeah.
You remember that whole thing in the
It's on
70s where it's like,
YouTube.
yeah, right. Yeah. And periodically, I mean, that's another huge influence for me is just In Search of, weird, you know, uh, supernatural stuff like that ends up
Yep.
cropping up in my work a lot. So,
Really?
mhm.
Huh. I'll have to look. What area of the country are you in?
Minnesota.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I actually once I found the In Search ofs were on YouTube, I went back and rewatched them and had really fuzzy memories of seeing them on TV when I was a kid originally, and
Mm,
like the things we talked about at the top of the stream, like Sesame Street, realized what a seed that planted because all
mm.
those things I went back to real hard later in life, and to think that I was exposed in passing to them. Um, didn't even quite register. And Sun Ra is such a huge. I mean, has such a huge. Um, that's such a huge thread that runs through his aesthetic as well. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh, yeah.
ancient,
Yeah.
lost civilization, culture, etc.
Yeah, the ties between Egypt and the outer
Yeah.
space and ancient astronauts and all that. I mean,
Yep.
it's
And Atlantis, and we get the
so
crystals
cool.
there.
The crystals, yeah. Yeah, that one is very much once in a while I will get, somebody will have a sort of a preconceived notion of what they want. And that is one where I'm not sure if it was Erwin Chusid or Jay, but they had that photo and we're just like, we want this photo. And so I, wrapped it in a kind of an Impulse Records 1970s frame. That's actually um, uh, Pushpin Studios font from that era too. So I think it's a Mill Glazer font.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, bringing him in there again. But yeah,
Yeah, this image, it's amazing that it was never actually used on a record cover originally. This
imagine
originally
why.
appeared on what, an advertisement
I
or a
think
purchase
so.
poster?
Yeah, and I
What's
had to do some digital tweaking of it too, which hopefully you will never notice. There is some things on the bottom were obscured by other things, and so yeah, there's a little bit of manipulation on there that ends up happening really much more often than people probably think.
very nice.
Thank you.
So Sundays, you guys never printed this as a poster, did you?
I don't think so. No, not as a
You don't
poster.
do any promotional materials for record stores or anything like that,
There
like album
are
flats or posters?
we Modern Harmonic did a giant poster that had little thumbnails of all the albums that we'd put out. And that's out there. But I haven't seen anything else really.
For the whole catalog or the Sun Ra catalog?
I think it's the whole catalog. I
Okay.
think it's all the catalog up to the point of whenever they produced the poster a few years ago.
What's interesting, and you probably already noticed this, but I'm just noticing it looking at it on the screen, is this cape that Sun Ra's wearing, the symbology of those sun rays with the hands is actually the symbol, the hieroglyphic symbol of Ra. And normally where Ra's head is the circle of the sun, which these rays and with the hands on the end radiate out from.
Oh, that's
So
cool. That is completely unintentional.
Sun
So
Ra is
yeah,
literally Ra, the
just
sun.
being Ra. That's beautiful. I love that so much.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I mean, I love symbols and symbology, but I had
Me
never
too.
noticed that before. That's what those rays and those hands are. Is it's the hieroglyph for Ra,
That's so cool.
but in place of the sun, Sun Ra's got his head.
Mm-hmm.
Always something new to find out. All right,
Yeah. Wow.
there are so many covers that you did that are beautiful. This is Pathways to Unknown Worlds. This is a direct representation of the ABC Impulse that you did restoration on.
Yep. We love that cover. I mean, that's just such a cool cover. Like,
It's
there's
a great
nothing to change
cover.
about that. It's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great cover. Very cool. Let's see. How about Omniverse from a standpoint of, did you have anything to do with the restoration and scanning of the art and trying to figure out how to take some of these hand-drawn Saturns and bringing it into, kind of a more modern CD layout? Like, what is that process like?
Yeah, that's one that Erwin Chusett had, and that is, I mean, that's you've seen a million of those. The ones that Ron, his band, drew and colored in the '70s, and that is one. And yeah, we just scanned it, and I spent a long time sort of cleaning it up and just sort of making it look reproducible. Tried to find a font that was true to the era that it was made, but also looked like something that might have come out if that record had been produced by a major label at the time. You know, and still, wanting to highlight the hand drawn aspect of it without getting too much in the way of it. So, I mean, I think it ends up looking pretty cool. And then the other aspects of the back and the inside, we try to make everything, sort of flow together. Yeah, I love that picture on the back too.
Yeah, it's a great picture. Who is that by?
I'm not sure.
Verrill, Oakland, 1979.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great picture. So, from an aesthetic standpoint, like as far as your inspirations in design and record covers and your experience like in bands, maybe doing posters or covers for your 7 inches and stuff, like how much experience did you have with like this real handmade DIY small run approach as opposed to kind of like the more finely crafted, professionally printed work that you're doing? Is this a part of your background, or is this something you learned more about in doing these kind of releases?
No, that very much in the early 90s, sort of before Photoshop and before those days when I started playing out in bands, and a lot of the bands that I was in were shoegaze bands, or psychedelic bands of various kinds. And
hold on a second, I got to show you something. It was too cold.
Yes,
my Swerve Driver shirt.
Very nice. Yes, I love Swerve Driver.
My favorite shoegaze band, if you can call them a shoegaze band.
No, you can. And we were influenced by a lot of that kind of stuff, and all those sleeves were super DIY too. And so we did a lot of collage work and just taping stuff onto other things and hand drawn stuff. And so that for a long time, that was my main thing. I have a lot of books from childhood that have holes in them because I cut out bits of them to stick on record sleeves. So one book called Strange Stories and Amazing Facts, which is my favorite book of all time. It's basically in search of, in book form, And I cut so many pictures out of that thing and stuck them into psychedelic collages that you would not believe. It's more holes than book at this point.
You still have it though?
Yes. Oh,
You
yeah.
held
And
on to it?
I bought many subsequent copies for friends or for just to have, I always need to have a copy of that book handy.
Published by Reader's Digest?
Yes.
Stories that are bizarre,
Yeah, it's basically
unusual, odd, astonishing, and often incredible.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot of the same stuff from In Search Of, but then there
Yep.
are sections on like, oh, I don't know, weird historical stories and myths about certain people and sayings. And yeah, it's a crazily eclectic book that I had growing up that I absorbed a lot of.
Cool. So that whole idea of handmade art, drawing, hand rendering, collaging, cutting, references from books, so that definitely is carrying through into your modern digital work.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh yeah.
I'm
Yep.
not reading into that wishfully.
No, that is a huge thing, and a lot of the digital work I do just is almost done to look like it has been hand collaged. Yeah. I mean, Celestial Love, that's another one that we had, a photocopied thing that Ra or one of his bandmates had done, and we just kind of cleaned it up and put it together. Yeah. And that's another, whenever there is an artist intention as part of a sleeve, I try to hang on to that as much as I possibly can. And, when we're talking about Sun Ra or his bandmates sitting around and cutting bits of things out and sticking them on and photocopying them, if that's available, I'm all for preserving that and trying to keep as true to that as humanly possible without getting too in the way of it, And
I have to tell you, as a fan and a record collector and an artist, I really appreciate the fact that you do that when it's right to do that. Because those things are irreplaceable, to recreate them and try and shine them up and make them more modern and better. You lose a lot of that artistic intent and charm, like you said. But where appropriate, you stay true to the original vision, but you do bring it forward where it makes sense. And I think it shows a great amount of taste and grace. This is a great example, the Fireside Chat with Lucifer album that, as far as I'm aware, originally was only ever seen as a black and white Xeroxed illustration, correct?
That's correct. Yep. And we did I colored it and then sort of used the fonts from a different album from the era. I can't remember which one it was, but tried to
Nuclear War.
Yeah, Nuclear War. Right. Yes. And tried to stay very true to that look too. So kind of combining the look of his sort of homemade photocopied stuff with something a little more professional. Again, like somebody had given Sun Ra a little budget and said, hey, here you go.
So how did you do the coloring? Is it digital or
it's digital? It's digital. Yeah. Almost all the painting and coloring I do is digital these days. I have a lot of weird techniques that I use Photoshop for, where I'll, paint a base color and then use like various spray paints over the top of that to create layers of shading and highlights and whatever, like you would with regular paint.
Sure.
But then, you've got the control of being able to turn off layers or change things around or use things like that. That's the background of that head is like a gradient.
Right.
I don't have to do that with a airbrush. I can let Photoshop do that for me. And so there are nice little shortcuts that working digitally gives you. But, in essence, you're still applying a brush to a canvas. It's just in the virtual realm, basically.
Well, and with a lot of taste. A lot of taste and a lot of tact. Because you're still retaining an almost magic marker opacity overlay quality there in the mushroom cloud.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain subtlety that still feels almost hand done, and I love the detail that you've brought out. With it being originally just black and white Xeroxed, there were subtleties to the illustration that, quite honestly, I think a lot of people looked at for years and years and years and never noticed that the eyeball
Was a skull.
is a
Yeah.
skull.
I know, isn't that cool?
And now it just pops right out.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the nuclear explosion as the brain, was something
Yep.
that it took me a minute to get. And yeah, I mean, it's such a cool drawing in the first place. And that's another one that from the photocopy, I turned it into a vector illustration in Illustrator, and then was able to kind of, clean it up really nicely to get just all the little nuances in there. So
This is a really fascinating album as a Sun Ra fan. I've learned a lot from it
mhm.
over the years, musically as well as spiritually. It made me do a lot of research to look into some of the concepts. I'm curious, um, what's your relationship with Sun Ra's music? Were you a fan before you got the job to start doing these album covers?
Yes, a fan, but not an obsessive fan. I I mean, I love jazz, and my philosophy about jazz is always the freakier the better. Like, I'm a huge fan of sort of Miles Davis, but especially his electric era stuff, and Coltrane, and Mingus, and all that kind of stuff. And so, jumping into Sun Ra, it makes a lot of sense. And Sun Ra is doing a lot of the same stuff that some of those guys are doing, but interestingly, not always jumping into electric instruments. I mean, he can do a lot of that same kind of stuff with acoustic instruments that Miles was doing with electric instruments, which I've always found really interesting. I mean, it loses no modernity or freakiness for it, when he's working in that realm. And then when he does move into stuff like the Prophet synthesizer and stuff like that, it makes total sense that he would.
Yeah, for sure. So since you said it, let's just skip ahead to the Prophet. So
Yes.
this is actually my favorite cover of yours to date.
Oh, wow, cool, thank you. Yeah.
I adore this cover. I can't wait to get it on vinyl. I haven't gotten my hands on the vinyl, but I think that this is the perfect example of the work that you've done, and you've just brought it to a whole new level, marrying the original aesthetics with your aesthetics, the new with the old, the ancient with the modern, and the fact that you've combined this circuitry and circuit board with the solar boats and the hieroglyphics and the vintage 50s typography, and then the 80s computer typography is just so it's just so smart. It's so brilliant.
Cool, thank you.
Um it's just so tasteful. It's so refreshing.
And there again, you get the in search of thing, because there's that whole kind of ancient astronauts aspect to that, where they would find these, images and say, oh, that's definitely a spaceship or
Yeah,
whatever.
totally. A
Just
helicopter, a spaceship,
yep, and
a
just
submarine.
and just the thought that, the circuit board is sort of a kind of hieroglyphic in a sense. I mean, it has a lot of those same visual aspects. It just, it combines really well, shockingly well. So
Yeah, this one's my favorite. I
I
mean,
love it
and
too. It's one of my favorites too.
yeah, I mean, if Sonny was still around, this was going to be on the cover of a Sun Ra album one way or the other.
Yes,
It's just so
I like to
perfect.
think so. Yeah,
So
and that's one
perfect.
that I don't have a copy of that one on vinyl yet either. I can't wait to get a hold of it.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like it kind of appears as though the production backup for vinyl has kind of affected this in some recent releases.
Yeah,
It seems
as
like
it
it's
is.
coming, but hasn't landed yet.
Yep.
So anything you can tell me kind of like about your process as far as like, okay, so you find out an album of recordings from the 80s on the Prophet synthesizer coming out. This job's coming your way. Like, what's that look like for you? Do you start with sketches? Do you start with research? How did it end up in this form?
Well,
What's your
I
process?
mean, and that one was a little hard won, and some of the best ones often are. I think I did sometimes if I don't have immediate inspiration for something, I'll do a lot of research and then I'll throw 5 or 6 things at Jay Miller over at Sundazed and just say, do any of these interest you in any way, shape, or form? And sometimes he'll come back to me and just say no. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And I get so frustrated. And oftentimes that's when I'll come up with my best idea is like after I've been through 10 bad ideas and had him just kind of go, nope. And I'm like, oh, and that's the one. And that album was very much that. I wish I could show you all the terrible ones that I did before that one. And
You can.
well, I don't even want to because they're so bad. I mean, I look back on them and I'm like, why did I even show those to him? But I had to go through that sort of process of elimination of carving out some of the obvious ideas out of my brain before that. And I think so we got a diagram of the Prophet synthesizer, and we got some brochures I think that Jay had bought off eBay, and we ended up I think with the vinyl you'll get there you go, you'll get that as a brochure in the vinyl that you can page through, and it's exactly replicating some of the stuff, and it's kind of a neat little extra, but that diagram was included with it. And then, once I looked at the diagram, I'm like, oh, hieroglyphs. And it just,
This diagram,
yeah,
the
the
circuit.
circuit diagram. And I saw that and was just like, oh, immediately hieroglyphics popped into my head. And I'm like, if I block off a chunk of that, yeah, boom. And yeah, so that, that immediately brought to mind Egypt. And then I just sort of, used some of his logo work from, from other stuff, but then the typography from Prophets. I mean, that's their font that they use. Mater Umbra maybe is the font, which I love. I love that font. So,
Yeah, you don't see that much anymore.
no, I know they don't use that one as a lot anymore. It's very 1970s, late 70s, early 80s. There's a lot of fonts from that era that sadly got overused in that era and just disappeared. And I'm all for bringing them back.
So how about the hieroglyphics here? Did you redraw these? Did you
Yes.
use them
Yeah,
from yours?
that's one that I think I took, something from some kind of an archaeological thing and re-rendered it. I redrew it.
Did you take any liberties encoding kind of Sun Ra or Prophet references into like redrawing it, or is it a straight lift from the actual hieroglyphics?
It's a straight lift, but I love the fact that it looks like he's holding a microphone.
Exactly. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, no, that was on there. That's a staff or something, but
Right.
But immediately when I looked at it, I'm like, oh, that looks like a microphone. That's really cool.
It
So
really does. And it's just the context that gives it a different connotation. I don't know the name of that staff, but it's actually got a tuning fork at the bottom.
Oh,
And they
hey,
would
that
hit the
makes sense
tuning
too.
fork on the ground. I don't know ritually what it was used for, but I see it on this cover, and it made me think of a microphone. So I didn't know if you did any tweaks to kind of make it more appropriate. And the snake shape looks like the vibration of a sound wave.
It does, and it also continues some of the sort of circuity looking thing too. I mean, it looks like a piece of some wiring or something, and I love the fact that those things just start to look the same. They start to look like each other so much when you look at them together.
Yeah. Yeah. The circuits start to get snaky, and it also looks like aerial views of the Giza Plateau, and you see all of the uh, buildings and excavations and workers, huts and dwellings. It looks like an aerial map of the Giza Plateau.
Very much, yeah.
I think it's brilliant. I love it. This is my
Thank
favorite
you.
one.
I'm so glad you like that one. Yeah, I love that one too.
I love this one too. This is,
Oh
I love
yeah.
this one.
Oh yeah.
What's your favorite? Do you have one that's particularly you're particularly proud of? That
You
just
know,
hit
for
the
the
sweet
for the
spot?
raw ones, I have to say Astro Black is my favorite, and the reason why is because the Arkestra has been using that just for posters and stuff, and I've noticed just in ads they'll be like, "Yeah, we're playing a gig in Germany or whatever," and they'll use the Astro Black cover, and I'm like, "That's cool! Like that's really cool."
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's totally appropriate.
Yes.
All right. So I could keep you all night, but I won't. I do want to talk about this one because the package is beautiful. It's gorgeous in vinyl. If any of you out there are vinyl people or buy vinyl and CDs and you kind of pick and choose which vinyl you're going to buy, this one's gorgeous because the packaging on the vinyl, it includes an extra book in it that looks like one of your old school composition books.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that
And,
is hers.
Modern Harmonic always includes cool little doodads in the vinyl.
Yeah, and this one, I mean, we had access to a lot of photographs, and that cool photograph on the back that I believe we got from her daughter, and some other stuff that we were able to use that very much, came right from her, just making it even groovier. So, yeah, that one is great, and I just feel like giving June her due, as an important part of Sun Ra's band, but as an artist on her own and just an amazing singer, was something that was long overdue.
Long overdue. And also for music fans and younger jazz fans, what a great entry point into the catalog this is for the right kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're new to Sun Ra and you love female vocalists with June's style. This could make a lifelong fan here.
Oh yeah.
Or you could never need to buy another Sun Ra album and you've got everything you need right here if you're cash.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, June is fantastic. And I know that Jay has plans for some other comps in the future. So I hope those happen because there's so many band members that it would be great to see some features for each of them. But this one is just a beautiful execution from a design and art standpoint. But I just love this record.
Yeah, me too. And I think if I remember right, we had to kind of convince June's daughter about the flames. And I mean, we had to sort of explain the symbolism of that and just the notion of her as this like creative force and the energy of creation and all that kind of thing that I was trying to represent with that. But yeah, she eventually came around to it and was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." So yeah.
What's the inspiration for the flames? Is it Japanese? Is it Tibetan?
It is. It's either Tibetan or Chinese, and it is from like an old manuscript of some kind. And I love that style of painting, probably because of the Rolling Stones' Satanic Majesty's Request. It's got that cool the border in the back that have all that sort of Japanese style illustration on it. And
are we gonna get a lenticular Modern Harmonic Sun Ra?
God, I wish. Oh, Please, yeah. If Jay's listening, please, yes.
This and lenticular would be fantastic.
Wouldn't it be? Yeah, I would love to do that. That's one of my favorite things. So yeah.
I can't imagine how much that would cost.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you, Jon. I really appreciate it. I will spare you from going through every single album, but I kind of touched on some of the higher points. I was really kind of interested in your process and kind of what goes into getting one of these things in our hands, so people can appreciate that there are all kinds of artists involved in making records, not just the recording artists, and just the absolute sensitivity and subtle touch that you and the entire Sundazed organization put into their records is just, you feel it. It's really clear. There's not a lot of companies out there that are doing this with this much passion and love and perfection. So
Yeah.
it seems important to recognize.
Yeah, there's a couple, artists out there, your Steve Stanleys and people like that are heroes of mine that, you know what I mean, that do the same kind of thing. And yeah, I'd like to think that I belong in with those guys in terms of just care of detail and such, and trying to treat the music the way it's supposed to be treated, as an artistic statement that needs to be presented and wrapped in something that's appropriate and cool and its own thing, really.
Mission accomplished.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. Any projects in the works that you can tell us about that you're excited about, or is this all hush hush in the Harmonic?
I mean, there's always stuff coming up. Probably nothing I can mention yet, but yeah, I know you wanted to mention, you talk about AI a little bit. Yeah, and before we log off or whatever, we should probably discuss it a little bit. I mean, that's definitely something that I've been messing with to some extent, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about what AI is and what it can do, and whether it's going to replace real artists or human artists, and whether it's an ethical tool to use. And I think AI is a lot like any other tool that's come along, in the sense that when a new piece of technology, especially for art, comes up, people predict that it's going to be the death of art, and it happens in music too. The synthesizer was invented and people were like, well, that's it for rock and roll, it's done. And it's obviously 40-50 years later, it's not. But AI is just sort of the latest thing, and I think people, having seen Terminator and having read a lot of science fiction about artificial intelligence, sort of picture it as this giant brain out there pulsating and waiting to come to life. And in fact, it's a machine tool, just like any other machine tool, just like Photoshop, just like anything that we've used, which all have used aspects of artificial intelligence all along. Now we've got these sort of things that can render images in a sophisticated manner. And the limitations that it has, I think, are in some ways insurmountable, in a way that will make it so that it will never be a replacement for human artists. There may be sort of a fad of people using it, for a little while, but I think it'll end up just being incorporated into people's toolbox in the same way that, a lot of other Photoshop things are. If that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah,
it does. So to give a little background and context for those watching, Jon has been experimenting and kind of talking on social media about exploring AI and I don't know what would the word. How would you describe it, John? Uh, Coming to terms with, making peace with,
Yeah, and just sort of
exploration.
exploring. Yeah, I mean, it is such a fascinating tool to use. And I think a lot of people out there right now are using it in a way, in a kind of a chintzy manner where they're just like, make me a dragon,
Yes,
like a,
lazily.
yeah, lazily, right? I mean, it's like a really easy way to render a picture of a hot chick in armor or a dragon or a superhero with pulsy muscles or whatever.
Yep.
And it'll do that and it'll look cool. And it's, I mean, maybe that aspect of art is something that's going to end up being threatened. But the thing that AI, because it is not a human brain, and because human brains are far more sophisticated than people think, AI has trouble with a lot of things. It can't draw hands. And you've seen some of the stuff that I've done where it's got hands that have like, yeah, 15 fingers, and everyone's like, well, it'll learn eventually. And will it? I mean, I'm starting to wonder if our ability to perceive how to render hands is actually the process of our own brain's evolution. And if, because we are, on that level of intelligence, that's the reason we can understand the musculature and function of how hands work and how they operate. Whereas the AI is just going, it's a thing that's got a bunch of sausages on the end,
Mhm.
and it can conceptualize a face, because they all look sort of the same, but hands, depending on what angle they're at, look like a bunch of different things, and it has a real problem with them. And at some point, maybe it'll figure it out, but there's always going to be those limitations that it has. It can't produce complex symbolism. You can ask it to, you can lead it into it, but it can't generate that on its own. It can't pick literary references out of the air. It can't take 3 pieces of art and combine them because it thought in the middle of the afternoon that it looked cool, or it doesn't have that higher order of intelligence that human art does. And all the different ways that we interpret images and put images together and conceptualize things, it just can't do that. It makes cool looking images, but that's because you tell it to. You lead it down the garden path.
Right.
And so it's still coming from you. Everything you tell it to do, it will do, and it'll do some cool stuff, but only as cool as the person controlling it at this point, and probably ever. It's never gonna 3 a.m. wake up and go, oh shit, I got an idea. That at that point we're doomed. The planet is doomed, and I don't think we're gonna get to that point anytime soon, honestly. In case you were worried.
Well, there's a lot to worry about. I'm not sure AI making album covers is really nothing I'm going to dwell on too much. But
yeah,
so you've been doing exploration, kind of in your personal work and fun work. Do you foresee any time in the near future, next couple of years, where AI, from a concepting perspective or anything like that, do you see it becoming a part of your professional process?
oh, it honestly, it already has.
Okay.
There have been a couple of projects where I just thought, I'm going to run this through AI and just see what it generates and see if it generates any thought. And, usually what I'll do is, when I'm looking for ideas or when I just kind of want to overstimulate myself, I'll just Google something and page through images. But if I ask AI to generate things, the stuff it's generating isn't stuff that's stolen. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not looking at other people's art. I'm looking at something unique. And so the ideas that it's coming up with, or that it's leading me to come up with, are maybe more, I don't know, they're not as derivative, if that makes any sense. And so there have been a few times where I've asked it to, generate particular types of images, and it'll give me 30 of them, and I'll go, well, I'm gonna pull this from this one, and this from this one, and this from this one, and then I've got a thing. And it's been pretty cool. I did use it for an ad recently too. That I do some advertising for our local record store, and I'm always trying to make the ads look like they're from an old like drug magazine from the 70s, so it looks kind of like old fashioned and yellowed and 70s-y looking, and I steal images and then kind of manipulate them. But instead I had AI generate something specific that I needed, and it was able to give me an image that looked like an image from the 70s without actually stealing something. And it was kind of nice,
So like you described, you get three different ideas, you take bits and pieces from all of them, you pull them together.
Mm-hmm.
Are you pulling them together and then feeding them back into AI, or are you pulling them into whatever software, Photoshop?
Yeah, at that point I'm pulling it into Photoshop.
It?
Yep. We're either redoing it or taking pieces of it and combining them, and yeah, there's a lot of manipulation that's been going on after the fact. It never gives you a perfect image, and I'm, again, that's the thing, I'm not sure it ever will. I mean, I'm not sure that if you ask it for something very simple, sure, but if you say, hey, I'm looking for an album cover from 1967 in the style of this particular label, it'll give you some interesting stuff. Might not be exactly that, but it might be something you can use.
Interesting.
Yeah, very. It's a cool tool. And I think it's something that people can and should mess with, become more familiar with it, and I think you will be less scared of it. If that makes sense.
I did, because of you, I did start messing with it and signed up for some accounts. I don't have the patience right now to learn all of the proper keywording and the right references to give. And I'm seriously questioning, like, how many hours do I burn learning all of the nomenclature and the phraseology to get it to do what I want it to do? Or should I just be spending those hours with a pen and a drawing pad? And like, as professionals, and it seems like this keeps picking up pace, the pace that we make dinosaurs and outmode people from their professions. Before, people had 30 or 40 years to have a profession before technology forced them to retire. And actually, for me, AI, I think it is the first time I've seen something come up in my professional life where I seriously question, like, can I get on board with this and do something meaningful with it? Or is this the thing that's going to make me sit on the bench? And I'm still not there yet, which is why I've appreciated you sharing your journey, because as someone who I admire what you do, I also know that I have a sense where I kind of understand where you're coming from and how you might use it, and kind of trust whatever conclusions you draw. So I appreciate that you're doing and sharing it, because you've been much braver than me and has spent a lot of the time that I'm not sure that I want to spend.
My favorite person that I like to watch use it is my son. I've got a 9-year-old son, and he's a really smart kid, and he's been trying to get it to render unknowable concepts in the universe. Like, he'll ask it to generate, a fifth dimensional entity as perceived in a third dimensional world or something. Or he'll say, like, a portal from, one time period to another, or just weird, like, cosmic concepts. And then watch what AI comes up with. And it always comes up with just the wildest stuff when you give it grand concepts like that. And to me, that's been the most interesting thing, is just watching it try to render something that you can't render. It's like drawing the face of God or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Well, and
a
it gets in,
machine doing that. It's wild. It's wild.
yeah, and then it gets into that whole science fiction realm where maybe that's what it's best suited to visualize, because it's dimensions and realities that we as humans can't perceive and see, but it does. It
Yeah.
has. It knows what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty far out. That's
Yeah.
cool. So I mean, I guess like all things um, that we kind of love as far as art and culture in our life, it's really it's up to the younger generations to lead the way and show us what it can do.
Yeah. That's always the way. Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And, I mean, it's just like, I was going to ask, like, well, okay, how does that apply to Sun Ra covers? And, if the orchestra was still printing up records in their living room and had the computer, like, would they be using AI to come up with some of their visuals? And then, I'm thinking about what you told me about this and this background and some of these textures and landscapes seem like something that you could have perhaps done some of your concepting work in AI and took references from that to get to here.
Yeah. Oh,
So
for
I guess
sure. Yeah.
it doesn't seem as far fetched as maybe I was thinking it was.
And a lot of the AI in just sort of its natural form can render surrealism very well. And so, like I said, the Monty Clarvine, the stuff that he did for Santana, AI makes stuff like that all the time, like
Yeah.
weird heads coming out of other heads, and
Yep.
weird landscapes, and yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
those Yes Prague Roger Dean covers that you've done with AI are incredible.
yeah, it can do that too, like very well.
It does that very well.
Mhm.
Excellent.
Cool.
John, thank you so much for your time. I really
Thank you for
appreciate it.
having me. I
Thank you
really
for the
appreciate
work
it.
that you
And
do.
thank you to all the Sun Ra people who are listening and paying attention. And I am so gratified that people like what we're doing. We'll keep doing it.
Yeah, we love what you're doing and are very thankful and grateful for it.
Cool.
Appreciate you spending your Friday night with us, and it was
My
great to
pleasure.
meet you. And
You as well.
hopefully we get to talk again in the future.
Anytime.
All right, take care of yourself.
Cool. See you later.
Bye.